Fantastic. Thank you so much to everybody who's joining us today. We're going to be discussing the idea and kind of the best practices behind aligning your organizational objectives and your communications objectives so that everything kind of just starts to fall into place. So essentially what we're going to be doing is it's a panel discussion. I'm going to be your moderator and kind of guiding everybody through this afternoon. We're aiming to be done at 12:30 or bang on as close as possible. I know that everybody's time is incredibly precious, especially come mid-November. Everybody needs something. Everybody has planning to do. So I hope that everybody walks away with at least one or two tidbits of helpful information, or something sparks an idea in the back of your brain and kind of assists you with your planning for 2025. So I'm going to introduce our guests. We've got Susan Ryan. Susan is our head of insight here at Ruepoint. Her and her team assist a variety of different clients with regards to crafting key messaging and making sure that all of your reporting needs are taken care of. That ranges from sentiment to spokespeople analysis and more. She's going to be talking to us kind of from a best practice point of view and guiding us as to how things actually practically work. I do just have to give a shout out to Susan and her team. Last week, they won 6 awards at the AMEC Awards in London, and really, really proud of the work that they did. They actually won an award for work that they did with Alan and his team. So Alan Owens is from Limerick. He's the communication manager at the University of Limerick. And then we're also joined by Frank Dillon. He's the head of communications and fundraising at the not-for-profit Alone. So I'm going to ask each of our guests to please give us a 30-second or less, kind of 60-second or less, shall I say, a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and kind of what led you to this field. I'm going to ask you to start, Sue, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So I'm head of insight here at Ruepoint. Worked in the industry for over 10 years now, been with Ruepoint almost since setup, so it's over 7 years. Started here as a media analyst, worked up then to media consultant, so more client facing, and now head up the insight team.
Yeah, Sue's part of the furniture here. We'll never get rid of her at Ruepoint. We're very lucky to have her. Alan, can I ask you to give us a brief synopsis of who you are and what you do?
Sure. As you said, Nicola, I'm the communications manager at University of Limerick. Prior to joining, I suppose, the comms team here in UL, I was a journalist and editor with extensive experience in local and national media. Primarily, I was assistant editor in the Limerick Leader for a period of time. I joined UL in 2019 as the comms officer, nominally the press officer. And earlier this year, I was the acting head of external communications, and in May appointed the communications manager. I'm a proud UL graduate and I live in Limerick.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks so much, Alan. And from your side, Frank?
Thanks very much, Nicola. Frank Dillon's my name, head of communications in Alone. We're a NGO who our primary goal is to support older people to age at home, and that brings us into a range of work. One of the biggest support areas is loneliness, but there's also a huge amount of support that goes into finance, health, housing issues. And my background is in media. I worked in radio for 20 years, and yeah, so we're delighted to be here. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you so much to all the guests. I really, really do appreciate it. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be throwing a couple of questions at the guests and just kind of guiding a bit of a discussion around the idea of aligning your communications objectives with your organizational objectives and the concept of crafting key messaging surrounding your brand. So as I mentioned, Sue's going to be talking kind of from her experience with a wide range of clients and guiding them on how to set this up. And then Frank and Alan are going to be talking about kind of their experience in their respective organizations. And the reason we've asked both of them to join us today is because they do receive reports with Ruepoint, but we kind of highlighted them as being two of our many clients who kind of have really taken this concept on board and really worked with it. And over several reports, we've been able to see the benefit of this in what they're doing. So in terms of kind of when done well, communication kind of can become such a powerful driver of business success, ensuring that every message, every medium contributes to kind of overarching, contributing to achieving the business's overall goals. So we want to make sure that what we as communicators are doing is aligning with what the business is doing. And so I'm going to direct the first question to Susan. Can you talk us through the science behind, I'm going to put that in inverted commas, the science behind aligning your communications objectives with what the organization is doing? Like, why is this so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. You can't just have like a generic list of, okay, here's our communications objectives. Don't think about what the business is doing, what the organization is doing. It really needs, as you said, to align. You need to ensure that any efforts you're making in communications, in terms of anything that you're pushing out to the media, it has to be aligned with the overall organizational goals and the outcomes of the business. So it's really important to have that unified strategy across the full organization. To just make sure that any messaging you're putting out there, it's supporting, so that it's not going against what the overall goals and objectives are. And I mean, this can be through a number of different things. So I mean, it depends on what you're focusing on, what the organization's objectives are. So it could be things like increased sales or market share, improvements in customer satisfaction, operational excellency. So whatever it is that are the objectives, the business objectives, it's really important to align those communications objectives as well, so that it's fully supporting those overall outcomes.
Absolutely. And as we're kind of, hitting the end of the year, I know lots of people are kind of looking at their reporting and where they're at, redefining their strategy, all of that. Some people may have been thinking about this in the past, or they may, be kind of starting afresh or starting, from scratch. What would you recommend? Like, where do you start? What would be kind of step one?
Yeah, I mean, that I guess is like, find out what those organizational objectives are. So that would be the first thing you would need to do in terms of setting those communications objectives. And I think to do this, you really need to liaise with all those various internal stakeholders teams, in terms of things like finance, sales, marketing, customer service, ESG. So you need to speak to those people. You need to speak to those internal stakeholders, find out what their objectives are, and then see how you can align those with your communications objectives. And I think once you have that information then behind you, that puts you in a really good position to start defining your key messaging, which is essentially what you're going to be proactively pushing out through your communications efforts.
Amazing, amazing. I am going to launch a poll quickly. I have a little bit of a question for our audience. Basically, the question is, it should come up there in a second. I just would like to poll the audience and see what is the biggest challenge that you as a PR or comms team are kind of facing this year. So we just want to get an idea of where everybody's at. So I'm just going to give everybody kind of a second to enter that. The options are reduced budget, navigating AI, developing an authentic brand voice in all of the noise that is out there with all the abundance of information that we have, and then measuring brand value and presence. Okay. See, one person has answered navigating AI. I think that's really, really interesting to me. I kind of thought, and I think Sue, you'd agree with me, I think we both kind of thought that would be a big problem that people are facing at the moment. Okay. I'm just going to give it one more second. I see one or two more people filtering their answers in. So what the answers are, I don't know if everybody can see that, but in terms of the biggest challenges facing comms and PR teams in 2024, we've got reduced budget, 27%. That's quite a lot. We've got one person who answered navigating AI, and then we've got 29% of the audience have said developing an authentic brand voice in amongst all of the noise. And then the majority of people have said measuring brand value and presence. Well, I'm glad to see that answer, because that is definitely something that hopefully we can help you with today, in the idea of crafting those key messages, and then, thinking about how we can eventually report on that. So I'm going to direct my first question to Frank. Can you talk to me about your experience in Alone in how you guys aligned your key messages with the organization's goals, because it sounds like Alone has very, very clear organization objectives as to what they're wanting to do.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. I suppose the nature of our organization is, we try to be as effective as we can when we talk as a brand, and we have to be careful. But what communications means in Alone, it means campaigns for change, which is lead the drive to age positively at home, and that's a pillar objective of our current strategic plan. And that means campaigning, but campaigning with not the authentic voice of older people involved in our messaging, and being consistent when we set out to call for policy change. We sort of sit down, spend a lot of work developing those policies, and we like to be constructive in the change we ask for and how we communicate it. Also, organizational sustainability, which is a pillar goal of the current strategic plan as well, and every strategic plan really for everybody. And what sustainability means for Alone is sometimes recruiting volunteers, because volunteers form a huge part of the work we do. It can mean fundraising. It can mean different types of volunteers, and rewarding and sending messages to thank the volunteers, and to, talk about and celebrate the work that they do. As well as I say, so we try to wrap a key message into the message, and think about very carefully what it is, who we're trying to talk to, and what we're trying to get, and how we're trying to say that comes last, I suppose. But with the help of Ruepoint, then we're able to track those key messages and see how effective they are.
Absolutely, absolutely. I personally worked on Alone's account when they first moved over to Ruepoint, and one of the things that struck me was how clear your objectives were, and how clear you were in terms of what communication efforts you were making to put that message out. And it made it really easy then in turn to track that and see where your successes were happening. Alan, I'm going to direct a similar question to you in terms of how you guys at the University of Limerick, how you aligned your key messaging to your organizational goals, as well as how did you involve different parts of the organization into that kind of process?
Right, yeah, Nicola, thanks for the opportunity to talk this morning. And I was struck particularly by something Frank said about the sort of authentic voice, and that's something that we try to fold into our communications or our messaging at all time, and oftentimes that will be, the student voice, or the sort of, depending on the constituent part of the institution, which is very, very large. I suppose that's the first thing to say. University with 2,200 staff and nearly 20,000 students. And it was interesting when I joined the institution. I was kind of tasked by my boss at the time to sort of ferret out the stories, as if I was a journalist on the ground looking for things that would be of interest. I suppose we've molded that over the 5 years that I've been there into a very strategic communications focus, in that, while and it's probably not coming as any surprise to anybody, UL has been dealing with some legacy issues over the past 12 months in terms of inbound reactive media. Our proactive outbound focus is very much aligned to, we're in the final year of our institutional strategic plan, and that has a number of key objectives, but there's a research focus there, and it's the primary lever that we would use in a external communications way, to profile the institution in terms of the academic output, the academic expert, the academic voice, and research for change and impact is one of the specific levers that we pull. So I suppose we try and be consistent. We try and constantly reinforce the brand. We're looking to maximize the impact. I suppose people are very overloaded with information. One of the things that we are positive about is that, in trust barometer surveys that are done, the academic voice is noted as being among the most trusted, and we do try and safeguard that as much as we can. I suppose it's really important about understanding those goals and the strategy and the values of the organization. We have a divisional strategy that was developed last year that runs to 2026. And the three sort of pillars of that are focusing on the impactful brand. We have a data-driven focus, and we want to have an outstanding digital presence. So it's really about finding the marriage between the overarching institutional focus and objectives and goals, and then how that aligns with our activity in a strategic way. So we work under those twin strategies. And as I say, we really put a strategic focus on research excellence. And we have a very, very strong emphasis on reporting and evaluation, and we're using Ruepoint for that since 2020, and that allows us to show the impact of our efforts, I suppose. And in the face of legacy issues and negative media coverage, we've been able to show that our positive sentiment has actually increased year on year. So the work that we're doing is really having an impact there.
Absolutely, and it's so helpful to have that kind of third-party data to kind of validate what you guys are doing, and then refer that on to kind of, showcase in terms of, getting buy-in from people to say, it's when you are speaking in the media, when you're doing interviews, all of that kind of stuff, it might not be a part of a colleague's specific KPIs, but when you can showcase the impact that has on, establishing a brand as a trusted voice, or, getting the brand there out as an expert voice in the media, getting that buy-in can be really, really important. Frank, I want to ask you about getting buy-in from colleagues and from other experts, leaders in an organization when it comes to getting that media engagement, because I know it can be so hard. People have their plate is full, and then you come to them and say, I need you to do this interview, or what about this as part of our strategy? We would like you to speak more in the media. Can you chat to me about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose I like Alan's expression about having to ferret out, the authenticity, the stories. And I think that's very much a part of it, because we in a lot of the work we do, we prefer older people to speak for themselves and communicate, what it is. And it's not and it's trying to frame that for them in look, this isn't about, your story in as such. It's about you representing thousands and helping us change the dial. I suppose that's one way we do it, but it is hard. You have to go down through the organization, and there's gatekeepers, sometimes they're salespeople, sometimes they're service staff in our case, and they kind of like their own relationships. And, you have to convince people, that, look, this is this is good for the organization. And then I think that's, again, when you're able to then report the effects to the board, and you're able to sit down and say, look, our media score is this. We set a target that we keep it consistent. The sentiment is such that, we are landing our key messages. Here's the, the story of a press release. I think being able to measure that effectiveness, because it is, and it certainly has been an area that's hard in communications, and you can be a busy fool. And I think having that sort of, reassurance, but also being able to report that reassurance, is very helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of employee or colleague feedback in setting your key messaging and your communications objectives, should we be reaching out to our colleagues and talking to them about it, as Sue said, so that we can kind of get that overarching business perspective?
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think you also, and sometimes we're too busy to do it, or we're something, the next thing comes along. I think you need to celebrate success, and you need to be able to say to, we had a shortage of volunteers in such and such an area. We issued a local press release. We had a volunteer who was willing to speak about their experience in media, and this is the case study, and this resulted in, we actually did move the dial. And I think when people see that, and they see that, the way you're able to measure it, but you're also able to report on how effective you are, I think that adds strength all the time. And you can't stop communicating it. And I'm sure Anne would agree, it's finding time in your day to do
it. Absolutely, absolutely. And then, Alan, in terms of like corporate leadership, so for you guys that might look a bit different, but senior leadership, or somebody at the C-suite level, should we be talking about those key messages coming from the top down, or is it something that's, you know, kind of best left to communications professionals to kind of be crafting their own key messaging, or is it more of a collaborative approach from your side?
That's very much a collaborative approach. Like validation from senior leadership is really important. But to get the sort of buy-in for that media engagement piece, you know, in an operational way, that's really down to the comms professionals, to the teams. I suppose we're very, very fortunate in our in our field and in our institution that there's no end of content. I suppose there's in fact there's a wall of noise, I suppose, that you have to try and separate out the different strands. And it's, as you say, you know, in terms of pumping out that key messaging, once it is aligned, as we've talked about, to the organizational objectives, then, you know, I think, and you can feed that back then up and down, I suppose, in the organization. Everybody can see the benefit of it, and you know, had the rationality for doing it. So there's definitely a role for leadership, you know what I mean? There's, you know, and there's very much a requirement for comms to have a seat at that executive table as well. But we put a lot of effort into communicating the sort of activities and successes, both of the team and the wider institution, to the organization. And we do a lot of workshops, we do a lot of training. We bring in, you know, you do need to bring in the external voice every now and again to validate your own work, which is just, that's just a matter of you know, a fact of life. You know, and we really see our work, as well as the sort of pumping out the proactive stuff, as being required to be in support of the senior leadership team, and in terms of getting their message out. And we've had a renewed focus, particularly on valuing and speaking to our internal community, because really the line between speaking to your internal and external stakeholders is probably a little bit blurred in a large organization like ours anyway. So we really want to get the trust and the validation of our internal stakeholders, as well as external. So yeah, I mean, you know, the best leaders will see the benefit of working closely with their comms team and listening to support and listening to advice, and you know, ensuring that consistency of messaging and that sort of two-way comms is really, really important. And you use KPIs and feedback and reporting from that, albeit the softer engagement stuff is harder to quantify. But you know, we do see a real value in how, you know, we can mitigate things by using spokespeople and key messages, and that comes through in the data that we get from our both from our media insight reporting and from our market analysis, you know, and we use Ipsos, and we do a lot of market research and stuff, so we can see the power of what we say about ourselves, you know.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask my next question to Sue in terms of reviewing our key messaging. How often should we be looking to do this? Is it a static thing? Is it an ongoing thing? Is there best practice in terms of how we review those messages?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is good to have that kind of core consistent messaging. And Alan spoke about there kind of in terms of crafting those and having those aligned, and various different stakeholders you need to speak to get that information. So I think keeping those consistent, those core ones, is a really good idea, because obviously you want to be able to benchmark, you know, year on year, anything changes. But I do think they, at the same time, need to be reviewed and just make sure that they are still in line with those overall organizational objectives. You know, because obviously things change. So we would kind of touch base, I suppose, with our clients about once a year, just check in. They don't always change them, but it's just good to see if anything has changed in the business, that you do need to update those messages. So I think especially around times of, you know, looking forward to next year and strategy, what's coming. So is there something different? If you've got a new campaign, launch of a new product, you know, anything like that you do need to maybe add a message, change something slightly, you know, the meaning behind it. And I think also as well, you know, as Alan said, not just proactively, but also those reactive pieces. Is there anything you need to maybe in terms of, you know, reacting, crisis management, that kind of thing? There may even be a short-term message that you need to look at as well. So yeah, I think it is kind of a continual thing. While you do want your consistent core, just keep an eye on them and just review them as you need to as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's excellent advice there. And then in terms of, you know, we're looking at organizations that are measuring their communications objectives, and then you've got your kind of your business metrics. So, you know, when we're looking at communication metrics, we're looking at brand awareness, engagement, sentiment, those kinds of things. And then in terms of business metrics, we might be looking at lead generation or sales conversion or customer retention or something like that, or anything like that, to kind of try and tie those two together. Frank, in Alone's case, is there anything specific that you guys look at in terms of those business metrics and linking that to communications? Is it something like you track donations or volunteer signups, or is that something you factor in?
Absolutely, because I think we're in a sector, and we are an organization that, you know, that old fallacy about 50% of your budget being wasted, we don't have that other 50%. You know, every penny needs to be sort of aligned, but also move the dial in some shape or form. And we recently had a very successful campaign around volunteering and recruiting volunteering, and it was a journey. It involved a TV ad, a radio ad, but it went all the way to the end degree of the metric, and it was I would say this, but it was a really nice ad. It was really well created. It was really, you know, it really did touch, you know, your heartstrings, which was great. But that's only to one point. The second part of it, that was the piece that we needed to work, and we measured that, and it did work, thankfully, and it was very successful. And it was great to be able to report that, because it's the effectiveness. I think that's the thing that runs across both metrics. You know, it's nice to have nice messages and nice logos, but it needs to move the dial. And I think that's what, yeah, we were always conscious of that.
Absolutely. Whatever your proactive measure is, it needs to have an action. It has to have a call to action and an effect on the other side. And Alan, what about you guys? What items do you look to incorporate? Is it application numbers or something else?
Well, we definitely have an eye on application numbers, although we're not directly responsible for student recruitment. That's devolved to another part of the institution. Our division is more focused on brand, but you know, this year we did have record CAO application numbers. So that is, you know, it's obviously something we're monitoring in amidst you know, how we deal with the more reactive stuff. You know, so it's something that we keep an eye on. I mean, we definitely, there's a renewed focus on things like international rankings and the attraction of academic talent, and, you know, research funding, sort of that sort of type of thing. And we've been monitoring sort of the, you know, the growth of our channels, our audiences, and, you know, the stuff that we get again from the insight reporting that allows us to track our progress. And we do benchmark ourselves against other institutions, but that's really less fed up the line and more for our own maybe nosiness or interest to see how we measure in terms of a size of team and that kind of thing. But really, and I suppose it kind of fits in with that sort of AMEC perspective. You know, we're increasingly trying to focus on the outcomes rather than the outputs, sort of thing. You know what I mean? So data is vital for what we do, but, you know, the kind of we've had a couple of examples in recent months of maybe more softer outcomes where we had two students, which I'll just very briefly fill you in on. One was a Paralympic athlete that we used in a campaign, who was on the side of a bus, and the mother of a child who has a prosthetic leg saw this guy featuring in the campaign and contacted us, and we connected them, and he went into the school, and the kid had been getting a bit of a hard time about his prosthetic leg, and you know, this 6'7" Paralympic athlete wandered into a school and gave a very inspiring talk, and at the end of it revealed that he also had a prosthetic leg. And, you know, the kid that was getting a hard time, you know, suddenly became a hero in his school. You know what I mean? So we saw the power of that. And another student that we profiled in autumn conferring just gone past, who had suffered a life-changing car accident, and had through rehabilitation and the power of occupational therapy, had returned to study occupational therapy. And we were sent a video afterwards. You know, she'd appeared on Drive Time and News Talk and in other places to talk about her story. and we were sent a video of her meeting that occupational therapist for the first time in years as well. So, you know, we're trying to focus a little bit more on that stuff and not just get too caught up in the data and the numbers, while very vital. You know, we like to see that you know, that really inspiring outcome stuff as well, where we can. And you know, it doesn't happen every day. Obviously, there are two sort of isolated incidents in a number of years, but it's important to focus on those things as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, that also ties into what Frank's saying about, you know, that tear-jerking kind of advert, you know, appealing to the humanness. I mean, at the end of the day, every single business across the world, every communicator, you're communicating to a person on the other side. You mentioned the idea around KPIs, and Sue, you also mentioned that around benchmarking. How important is it in setting those KPIs and then benchmarking them on a continual basis?
Yeah, so I think both Frank and Alan have touched on this. They need to go back with something. So you can't just say, yeah, it's working. So yeah, I think setting those clear KPIs at the beginning, again, aligning them with your objectives, you know, clearly what you're looking for, the well-defined, start to measure them, then start to benchmark. I know Alan mentioned, like, you know, competitor as well, but even within your own, you know, your own data and your own coverage, to have kind of something tangible to go back with those results. So then you can report back upwards, whoever you need to report to, and then you have those metrics there to show them. And I think, yeah, consistent benchmarking is really important. So whether that will be, you know, going forward, obviously you're going to keep benchmarking, but even to kind of look at that historical piece as well, just to give you a starting point. So we might have someone say they want to start from next year, but you know what, maybe look back over the last 6 months, 12 months, and set that in place as well. So then you have that, and you can then measure that growth and see how things are moving. So yeah, it's really, really important, because you have to have something to show at the end of it all.
Absolutely. And I think your piece there about that historical landscape piece, or an audit of some kind, looking back, it's great to have something, you know, you're getting something in 2025, but to have that kind of jumping off piece as we strategize for next year can be hugely important.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So if there are any, I have one more question for Frank and Alan, but before I do that, if anyone wants to pop in a question or an answer or anything like that, we do have a Q&A session. If you move your mouse and you hover your cursor, there is a Q&A tab at the bottom. So if you have any questions there, and then I'll pick a few to ask the panelists afterwards. So kind of my concluding question for this afternoon is around, as we approach the end of 2024, we're looking to 2025. Where do you see the PR and comm sector kind of going for next year? Are there any trends that you can kind of identify or think might come to fruition for 2025? It's a really, really hard question. Anything that you can kind of think might be important, or anything that you think will continue to be important that was for this year? I'm going to ask you first, Frank, if that's okay.
Thanks. I think I'm not sure so much about growth, but in terms of themes, and I think we touched on it earlier, and one of your respondents touched on it in the poll, is this whole AI piece, you know, and everybody's saying, oh, just put the information into the machine and a press release will come out the other end. And I was struck recently by a concept I heard of, the doorman fallacy. And if you think a doorman just opens and closes a door, well, then you can get a robot to replace him. But if you appreciate the wider scope of what a doorman does, as in their filtering, their good day, their salutation, I suppose. And I think in communications, we can be told, oh, sure, that AI can do this and AI can do that. But I think the authenticity is going to become more and more a theme, I think, anyway, certainly in the work we do. And just being very wary of being caught by AI in a way, because the way some people are using it. And I know there's great stories of it happening years ago, but I don't think it goes away. So I think that's authenticity, I suppose, is what I'll probably finish on.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was asked a similar question recently by somebody, and my answer was around the authenticity of and the establishing like trust in a brand as we move forward. Alan, what about you?
Well, I certainly hope, but it's unlikely to be that it would be more proactive and less reactive. But that's probably a wish rather than a belief.
I think that's probably echoed by every attendee here today.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose for the higher education sector that I operate in, I think it's likely that it will become maybe increasingly more sectoral, and institutions will be stronger together potentially, and we're fortunate to be part of the Irish Universities Association, which is a strong voice for the sector. But I could see that becoming potentially a stronger network, given the engagement with government and the requirement for funding and that kind of thing. In terms of PR and comms, I one of the key things we've done is implement editorial partnerships, and I think there'll be an even greater reliance on editorial partnerships. I think it's very difficult to land academic thought leadership content stuff in mainstream media. It's becoming more difficult because of competing media landscapes and the busy news environment that we're in. And to touch on the AI thing, while I think it will become more prevalent, it's and I don't want to sound like a Luddite that I'm shying from AI, but I was at the Irish Journalism Awards yesterday, and I spoke to a number of people, and there was an award specifically for headline of the year, and there's absolutely no way you can convince me that AI can produce the kind of headlines that we all enjoy. And I firmly believe that you can spot an AI generated press release from the one that has been properly crafted and some thought put into it. I'm old school. I'm a print journalist at heart. So I firmly believe that there'll still be a reliance for that bit of craft that goes into it. But I do believe we can incorporate elements of AI into, potentially, streamlining potentially how we operate, but rather than I don't believe it will ever take over in terms of crafting that output as but I would hope, as I say, that we move to a less reactive footing and to a more proactive footing. But maybe that's just my wish for 2025. Let's see how that's borne out.
Well, if anyone's writing a letter to Santi, we know what to ask for. I have two questions that have popped up in the Q&A section. If any of our attendees kind of need to head off, we're just going to be answering these two questions. So I do understand, I respect your time. So if you do feel that you need to duck off, I totally understand. And if any of you would like a copy of the recording or anything like that, that will be available afterwards as well. So I have one question. I think I'm going to direct this one to Sue first, if that's all right. What it says over here is that I work within a small PR agency and budgets are really tight. How do you do an audit with little money? Where do I start?
Yeah.
That is the number one question
That is.
on every kind of at least senior leadership's thing at the moment. How can I reduce costs?
Yeah. How do we have the answer? No, I mean, I think that don't let that put you off is what I would say. Ideally, budget wouldn't be an issue and you could look at absolutely everything going back if you wanted to see a yearly piece, let's say. But, we can look at a sample of content in terms of that measurement piece and still deliver, the same results. It will give you an idea. So what I would say is, look at what's important to, within your organization, or if it's a PR agency, with whatever client you're working with. It could be a case that, maybe they want to have a heavy focus on regional, as Frank was saying there, in terms of that regional piece and local piece, and I'm sure for Alan as well. But, or is it, more important to have a look at what's happening nationally? So you can decide between, print, looking at online, whatever it is, whatever media type you're interested in, and we can help with that, like to craft that sample. So I would say definitely don't let you put it off. It's not ideal. We'd obviously want to look at everything. But I think, I would definitely still look into it and just see what you can actually focus on. And I still believe what you would get at the end in terms, again, it would be the same thing. It'd still be setting those same KPIs, measuring those things. It's just a smaller sample and it will give those results at the end. And then I think as you discussed with Frank earlier about buy-in, it's something then to report back, or for the PR agency, for that client to report back on, and then hopefully kind of get that buy-in then going forward to maybe be able to increase that. So I think it's a good starting point anyway.
Absolutely. We've all got to start somewhere, right?
Yes, definitely.
And speaking of buy-in, the next question, I think there's a typo here. It says, how do you motivate internally to conduct a deep dive ongoing for outside reporting? So I think what they're asking here is about how do you get buy-in or motivate from the people who control the purse strings? How do you get motivation for them to do some sort of reporting? I'm going to ask Frank and then Alan to weigh in on that in terms of getting budget and getting support to acquire any kind of reporting. Any suggestions or tips from two veteran report, kind of receivers at Ruepoint, Frank?
I think it's like anything, any incremental cost, it always gets weighed up in what problem is it answering, and what are the benefits of it. And I think a lot of time can be spent with, I like that and I like that, and there's a lot of subjective input and feedback on communications, and it's great to be able to put some metrics on it and say, well, look, you might have liked that piece, but it didn't actually do it, it didn't score, it didn't have the sentiment, it attracted, I think it's sometimes it's about turning on the light instead of walking through a dark room. Sometimes it just gives you that bit of extra vision and clarity, and then it works backwards, because you can then you're thinking about you're thinking about your outcomes when you're sitting down to write. I think it makes the whole organization become a little bit more conscious and a little bit more efficient in how and why they say it, and they're not rushing up just communications all the time, say, we need to get this out, we need to say this.
I feel like you're speaking to somebody that I had a conversation with yesterday in terms of that. I hope I see her on the line, and I'm sure she'll know who I'm talking about. What about you, Alan? Kind of final question before we head off.
Well, I think the important consideration is, can you afford not to do some of this kind of thing? Because otherwise, if you put all this activity and energy into output, and you release it, and then you don't sort of have any feedback on how it is landing, or I think you're wasting potentially some of that energy. So you do need to do something that gives you some sense of how it's performing. In terms of getting that buy-in, it's really, really vital to try and talk about this regularly, and to report it back as regularly as you can. And I go back to the example of the perception versus reality, maybe, where and not to speak specifically about my own organization's experience, where you might feel maybe slightly overwhelmed by negative media coverage, but you can actually point to the reality of the fact that some of this stuff exists in a bubble, and the positive work that you are doing is really counteracting any perception stuff that's out there. So I think that's absolutely vital for getting the buy-in. In my specific experience, we weren't doing any sort of reporting or analysis of our media output until we started in 2020, and we now have 5 years of data. Well, we'll have 5 years of data when we finish this year. So one of the things I want to tackle for next year is a kind of a trend analysis then over that 5-year period, and see, in a global way, how things have changed or not, or have stayed the same. The data goes where it goes, sort of thing, and it's up to you to be as frank as you can be with that when you're feeding it back. So look, I kind of return to that point of, you can't really afford not to do some kind of monitoring, because otherwise you're really wasting the energy that you put into what is, everybody that operates in this space, spends a lot of time lovingly crafting something, be it a campaign or just a specific piece of media output. So you really want to know how it's performing, and this is the way to do it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk us through your experience and kind of how you do things and in your own separate organizations. And thank you to everyone who attended today, and for those questions. I really do appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to walk you through anything. And there's also a lot of information available on the AMEC website in terms of smart objectives, and kind of best practice for all of this. So thank you everybody very, very much. I really appreciate it, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks a lot,
Bye-bye.
Nicola. Take
Thanks.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.